Hey, I just wanted to talk real quick about the family integrated church movement or the age integrated church movement in America. The United States, at least, that's what I'm familiar with. This is a fairly recent phenomenon. I would say late 90s, early 2000s was when it really started catching on. It's still a very small subset of the evangelical church here, but it might be unfamiliar to you, especially if you're in like a high church tradition that already you just all come to the same mass or whatever. This may not be strange to have your whole family there with you in the pew, but if you're from not just the mega churches with all the programs and grade-based classes, but I mean, that's the model down to most small to medium-sized churches here in the United States, where your family comes in and you end up splitting up by age or class, and you see each other on the way back out. And I'm not making fun here of childcare and everything if you need, children. I'm not even necessarily that big of a fan of the age integrated movement. But I do have a lot of experience with it, I would say, and maybe can shed some light on some things. So why would this be a intentional thing to get your whole family back into the pew together? Well, it depends on who you talk to. There's going to be a lot of different reasons. I would say some of the top ones are there's people who definitely do it for a restorationist sort of motive. Essentially, how did the early church worship together? Well, they did it house to house, families, households, all together. And so if we want to copy that, we're most likely going to not split up the household. Now, there's some more specific reasons. There's functional, like practical reasons, and spiritual reasons for it. It really is a big reaction over against the commercialization of the church, which took to grow and to be effective, with its business meetings and everything. The American church said, how can we incorporate effective models of organization, right? And we look at things like the public school model, et cetera, and we see these things well practiced with a lot of efficiency, etc. And there's a lot of comfortability too for people coming out of the world into the church. They know what to expect with grade-based classes. You say age appropriate, based on developmental status, age appropriate teaching, etc. And there's some benefit to that. But this now is really a reaction. The age integrated movement is a reaction against this copying of all the secular models to build this almost unrecognizable institution that says, hey, let's all come back together as families and worship the Lord together. There's other practical considerations because the family integrated church movement courts homeschooling families quite a bit because they're most comfortable with everyone being together because they're already not splitting up by grades, and there's shared values there. One of them is that your children are going to grow up in this church movement, interacting, not necessarily in any weird ways, just like on a conversational level, all the way to spiritual conversation with people older and younger than them. And it can be really developmentally helpful, I would say. You end up with well-rounded, socially adept children, teenagers, etc. They're much more prepared to leave. They're not leaving a little school bubble and going into the corporate world where now they're talking to adults for the first time. They're already well adjusted to all ages. That is a cool practical benefit to kind of have that mixture. There are some spiritual development reasons though for it. So for instance, if your child is a concern in any sort of other peer group, like if you're split up by grade and isolated off with other teenagers, as you know probably from public school experiences, etc., there's a lot of just crap. Sorry to use the word. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in those circles. Bullying, peer pressure. It can be subtle. It's not necessarily overt, but there's so much, especially as teenagers, there's so much weird pressure and angst and heart issues and stuff that pop up, and people really could be professing Christ, sure, but they are not at a maturity level to know how to love each other well. Let's just say that. And there's a lot of harm that can be done there just with things that are said or the things that are unsaid. etc. Yeah, it can be really messy. And so one of the goals, kind of maybe a side goal for this, is hey, if you take them out of those environments in the church and you have them all together in the same room, there's not going to be space for all of that stuff to play out, right? It's kind of protecting your kids. Unfortunately, it turns into this, from what I've seen, it turns into a laissez-faire parenting when it comes to these group situations, because there's a false sense of security that those things aren't really happening here because they're in the same room as us. And you have the parents talking to the parents turned around in this corner, and the children, foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child. The children are working out their foolishness over in that corner. And just because they're in sight doesn't mean they're in earshot and you know what's actually going on. It's just not the case. And it's not that the family integrated church movement has more of a problem with this stuff necessarily than the regular church scene. But I don't think they're combating these issues as well as they think they are just by the system. You're going to end up with a lot of the same issues, and in some cases maybe even worse, because you think everything's just going to be okay. For instance, in a regular church setting, you're probably going to have at least one paid staff member, youth leader or something, and hopefully a host of volunteers that are adults and paying close attention to the children. Like when they're there, that's their job, is to be involved in those conversations with the youth. Not to mention being trained in things like mandatory reporting for if there are any sort of abuses going on against the children, or they're struggling with self-harm things and other mental health issues and everything that they may not even in the family integrated church movement may not be talking to their parents about, right? They may end up talking to each other about it, but you may not want that to happen very much peer to peer. So having qualified adults that is their job to pay attention ends up sometimes playing out better when that's done and taken care of than the parents just going, hey, we're here in the same room, it's okay, and then ignoring and not being involved in anything that's going on. So not necessarily as effective as it would hope to be in the family integrated movement. Another thing is the discipleship aspect. Part of the goal here, not having the Sunday schools and youth groups and all of that, is to leave the vacuum of discipleship open, so that the need of parents taking that discipleship role, specifically fathers, is impressed upon them, and then the church can turn around and spend most of its time equipping and discipling the parents to then disciple the kids. And that's a worthy goal. It doesn't necessarily play out that way. The mileage may vary, and it comes down to essentially the parents that were going to disciple their kids well, that had the intention and motivation to do that, and were well equipped to do that, and had the time to do that, etc. They're going to do that. But you're not going to be able to convert very many families into completely changing the way they do things and being able to disciple effectively. I've heard many men talk about how before they were exposed to all of this, they did not have much of a conviction or even know that it was their responsibility to really disciple their children. Deuteronomy 6, the walk along, talk along, teaching them when you wake up in the morning, when you lie down, when you walk along the road, right? And so now that's impressed upon them. But one thing that happens is, especially in the homeschooling families, you end up with single family income because somebody's got to teach the kids. And so you usually have these fathers out there that are working their behind off just to provide for many kids and a wife. And they're too busy with work and then too exhausted when they get home. And you're supposed to have this daily church service in your home that they're leading, and they can't do that, right? So now you have this guilt laid upon them. There's this burden resting on them that they're not doing their job or doing it effectively, the one that really matters, but they can't. And without the church community coming alongside them and going, we're going to be involved in the spiritual instruction and personal discipleship of your children, there are going to be other adults that have more time for this, even that are more gifted as teachers, more gifted with discernment, other spiritual gifts, etc., than you, that are going to come alongside you as a parent and assist you in that call to faithfulness and making sure your children are discipled. But there's this kind of isolation of the responsibility to disciple your kids. It's only I should be discipling my kids, and I'm actually I'm letting someone else usurp my role when I let other people teach them and disciple them. And in reality, that's most likely probably part of your faithfulness, is to go to the church and say, hey, we need help with this, walk alongside us as we walk alongside our children. And I'm not saying it has to be a specific sort of program or youth group or whatever, but effectively, I see children and teenagers in these regular churches, and I totally know there are bad youth groups that are just completely ineffective, not focused on the gospel or scripture at all, sure. But with good youth groups or Sunday schools or whatever, I see kids that are getting biblical instruction and personal, like spiritual counseling and discipleship from a host of different people multiple times a week. And then what their parents can do, if they have involved parents, believing parents who want to disciple, is integrated with what's going on. Their parents can talk to them about what they're learning. They can discuss biblical things, etc., when they have the time and ability to do so. But the children aren't being neglected spiritually. And however that, it doesn't have to be that specific model, but however it's happening, I see more effective, real growth and spiritual development oftentimes in a regular, well-functioning, regular church body than in the efforts of this unique family integrated church movement. And it's unfortunate, and I wish there was a way to make the family integrated church movement work really well. I just have not seen, for a variety of these factors, these practical reasons why it doesn't end up working as well as it intended, solving the issues it was trying to solve. And that's my experience across several different churches, some I've been involved in, but also just observationally being close to. And maybe your mileage has varied. You let me know down in the comments. Is this something that's new to you? Have you been in that sort of environment? Why? What did you think it did well? What do you think it didn't do well? I don't think it necessarily should be a movement that should be over, but it's definitely one that's going to need some reformation and rethought, some analysis. I think if you've gone into it 20 years and then you say, here's what our goals were starting out, here's why we were doing this, now let's look at what we've been able to actually accomplish in that and what we haven't been able to accomplish in that. Why? What are the barriers? What were we oblivious to? What it was really like to go through this sort of ministry, and how can we readjust to make sure that we are effectively doing our job, especially as leaders, are the people, not just the parents, not just the fathers, but are the mothers being equipped and shepherded well to disciple their own children, etc. Just take a step back. Let's look at it. Let's readjust. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.